The European Union has put its trade deal with the U.S. on hold for now. Its parliament voted to delay the deal's approval following the Supreme Court's decision that struck down U.S. President Donald Trump's wide-ranging global tariffs.
But this means not that we never vote on that. No, we want to have clarity about the situation. We want to have clarity from the United States that they are respecting the deal, because that's a crucial element, that we want to have stability.
Today, President Trump issued a warning to U.S. trade partners, posting on Truth Social, any country that wants to play games with ridiculous Supreme Court decision, especially those that have ripped off the USA for years and even decades, will be met with a much higher tariff. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer spoke to CBS's Face the Nation about the U.S. seeking to impose more global tariffs.
Considering the severity of the issue we're dealing with, which is a huge unfairness, huge disparity, huge imbalance between the United States and its trading partners, just the urgency of the situation demands that he use his full authority.
Premier Doug Ford called the Supreme Court's decision a positive message that puts pressure on the president.
President Trump still has a lot of tools, but I think it's the walls are closing in on President Trump. No matter if you saw him lose the vote and 6 Republicans cross the floor with Congress, then you saw the Supreme Court decision. We'll see how the Senate decision comes up.
There's lots to dig into with the power panel. Vandana Kathir was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. And here with me in studio, Rob Russo is Canada correspondent at The Economist. It is nice to see you all. Rob, I'm going to jump right in with you. We're watching the EU say, well, hold on a second. Maybe this doesn't have to be a written-in-stone deal after all. India's done the same thing. Canada never signed a deal, and a lot of people are saying that was probably smart, the way things have played out. Is there leverage here that Canada can play, knowing that the tools Trump uses to impose tariffs are now, even if only slightly, but they're slightly more limited?
I think the waiting game is still the game to play. Leverage, I'm not sure. I think that the government's muted responses by design. Anybody look like they're strutting or doing a victory lap now is probably going to get a bigger bullseye on their back. As it is now, we see with the blast of his nostrils and a blast of keyboard strikes and a shrinking clenching of his lips, right, that he's not taking this well. And so just look at how he reacted to the U.S. win over Canada at the Olympics. He's a sore winner. We can just imagine what kind of a loser he is. But it is true, I think, that things have changed. I think it's fair to say that the impulse and vendetta of Donald Trump has now been bracketed. His ability has been bracketed. I think that there is no unlimited power now that the Supreme Court has asserted its right. Will the Congress do that? It's very interesting. If he needs to deal with 301 and Section 122 versions, which require
investigation
and renewals from Congress, that pushes this into the summertime. How many Republican senators and members of the House of Representatives are going to be happy about campaigning in support of tariffs, which has caused increase in prices, which is the issue facing everyone who's up for re-election this year? I think that's the advantage Canada has. Nothing else really in terms of the Section 232 tariffs. He still has the power to do that. But that bracketing around Trump's power, I think that's important. And the electoral calendar works in favor of Canada as well.
And Vandana, it's not like the Supreme Court is part of that bracketing. The pushback in Congress was part of that bracketing. The pushback from American businesses in the USTR hearings in the fall was part of that bracketing. It felt last winter and spring that we weren't seeing any of that pushback. Are we beginning to see enough that it can have a material impact on the way Canada and the U.S. continue to sort of forge whatever this deal might look like in the end?
I think public perception may not show that. I think publicly Donald Trump will want to showcase. He'll get more angry. He'll be emboldened. I think he'll want to push forward on a tool he truly believes in and has for years. But I think that as business groups and Americans, and as the midterms approach, put more pressure on their political leaders and to lobby the government and show that impact as close we get to the midterms. It could, but you won't see it in the public regard. You won't see it on through social. He's going to act like this as much as possible, and perhaps behind closed doors, it makes a place for people to be able to negotiate easier. But I don't think you'll see a shift in his mood publicly.
Brad, we might not see a shift in his mood publicly, but as the walls that Doug Ford talk about close in on him, this is a president I remember from his first term. When things looked bad, he lashed out. He might not sort of give you the leverage. In fact, he might push back and say, as things get worse, he'll ramp up his rhetoric.
Yeah, he doubles down. I think that's fairly consistent with what we should expect, because that's what we've seen in the past. One of the interesting things coming out of the Supreme Court decision on Friday was, I think, one of the big winners. There's a handful of winners in that court ruling, but one of them was Congress, and in particular Republican congressmen and women. For those guardrails that we're talking about being put around them, those tariffs or taxes on the U.S. citizens, the court was clear in saying that is only the purview of Congress. And I would assume that this is going to give some congressmen and women a little bit more bravado, a little bit more say. Right now, being a Republican, House of Representative or a senator is a pretty useless job, and that's why you're seeing some of them quit, saying this guy's doing everything out of the White House, everything's executive order, nobody asks me anything, nobody talks to me, and all of a sudden now the Supreme Court saying if you want to do certain things with your tariff strategy, you're going to have to talk to Congress. So how Congress will behave going forward, or will Trump now kind of reflect a little bit and say maybe it's time to cut some deals? But I don't see a lot of those Republicans wanting to impose tariffs on the American people. And I think a lot of Americans are going to say, where's my rebate from all those taxes that I paid over the last 3 to 6 months? I'd like my money back, please.
Well, Kate, I think the refund question, the administration is saying they're waiting for guidance from courts, which I suppose they probably have to. But you can get the sense they're going to try to push that off as long as they can. Can they afford to not sort of jump in and say, absolutely, American businesses that paid these tariffs should get their money back as they were imposed improperly?
Yeah, I think we have to understand that this is not just a central economic pillar for the president, the imposition of tariffs, but also a key political deliverable. He wants to be able to enter the midterms saying that, he's brought other countries to their knees and tried to rebalance what they would, describe as a trade imbalance, but with various countries. I think, we've talked a lot about what Trump's reaction might be or not be, but I want to go back to what Rob has talked about in terms of Canada's reaction. And I think that we need to keep calm and carry on here. There has been virtually no change for Canada, even with Friday's ruling, Obviously, sectoral tariffs remain very much in effect for steel and aluminum, and forestry and other sectors. So those are still causing an enormous amount of pain. So I think on the Canadian side, there needs to be some consideration of, what we can do to come back to the table and find some middle ground. Obviously, the president, I would think, is going to be in a deal-making mode. I'm not going to suggest that that's going to mean he's feeling particularly, aligned to concessions. But we know that both governments were close on a trade deal sometime last fall, at least on sectoral tariffs. So is there an opportunity, now that there's uncertainty on that global tax, to try and find some progress in other areas? Those are the conversations I hope that our government is having south of the border.
Rob, I think that's a really interesting sort of framing of this, that we have a new ambassador who just arrived in Washington, met with Trump in the Oval Office. We have a new chief negotiator. Dominic LeBlanc says he's getting back to meeting with Jameson Greer for the first time since that ad. Is there an opportunity to, now that we know the lay of the land with the legality of these tariffs, to make something of a deal heading into CUSMA, or is everything leading to July and the proper renewal of CUSMA as we move forward?
I think there's an opportunity. I think Kate's right. I think that they were really on the precipice of a deal last October. But if you're the UK and you've signed a deal with Donald Trump, you now know the value of that deal, right?
Absolutely.
The UK signed a deal for 10%, and now they're looking at 15%. I felt quite sorry for that EU trade official we saw earlier who was looking for some certainty and stability. I felt like saying to him, come back in 2029. There might be some then, because there won't be. And I do come back to this notion that while Donald Trump is reeling, and he's reeling right now, while he's losing, he is at his most dangerous.
Yep.
And I do think the door is open for a discussion. I think talking is always better than fighting. But if you're Canada, you do want to wait until you're out of the, at a minimum, you're out of the primary challenge season. And I'm not talking about November.
Yep.
Between now and the summer,
Yep.
the president has the ability to launch primary challenges against any Republican who steps out of line. And there are lots of them that want to. We've seen that. But once that's done, then you're in a position to really begin to use the levers of Congress to your advantage, I would say. I would look for openings in July and August.
Vandana, who does Dominic LeBlanc trust in this? Is it Lutnick? Is it Besant? He seems to have the most effective relationship with Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative. And I know this is a little bit of Kremlinology in terms of who's rising and who's falling. But do you have a sense of who the most reliable ally on the Trump administration side of the table is?
The answer to that is nobody and everybody. I think it really depends on the mood of the president that day. I think Minister LeBlanc knows that. I think he knows that the powers of influence can shift around Donald Trump as to who's in his ear and who he listens to. And as Rob alluded to, there isn't a negotiating partner that's negotiating in good faith here. So everything you take has to be with a bit of skepticism and knowing that there's going to be a perpetual uncertainty with anything that we work on with the United States. I think continuing relationships as much as possible and having cordiality is important. I think Mr. LeBlanc has been able to do that. But I don't think there's one particular person he can trust because it all depends on the president. We're seeing someone who last week his ire was on the Gordie Howe Bridge. Before that, it was jet certifications. Before that, it was Canada-China, tariff relief. So I think keeping everyone and having that relationship is important, but at the same time, I think Canadians have to brace for the fact that this will be a consistent up and down and it could even go well past July as well.
Just for what it's worth, we're getting some movement on the wires that Trump has been speaking, saying he's considering new national security tariffs after the Supreme Court ruling, considering new U.S. As from reporting from the Wall Street Journal, Tyler tells me in my ear, the U.S. levies on half a dozen industries would be issued separately from the new 15% levy, and that new U.S. tariffs could cover industries so large scale like batteries, cast iron, iron fittings, plastic piping, industrial chemicals. So, he is revisiting the plan as he said he would, Brad. And I assume we're going to have to kind of roll with the waves of this for probably a couple of days and weeks. What do you think?
Yes. Well, I want to go back to a question you asked, Vaughn.
Yep.
Who does he listen to?
Right.
The only thing that he listens to is the market, and in particular the bond market. The only time that he's actually crawled back from anything of significance, if it wasn't the Supreme Court this time, which I think is the first major entity that's actually put the guardrails around him, is the markets. So we'll have to see what the reaction is to these latest. Second thing, the plan is to flood the zone. That is, Supreme Court ruling comes out Friday. By Monday, you're talking about 15% global tariffs. And if I was Keir Starmer, I locked into 10. But the court just ruled that the 10% that he locked into should go to zero, unless he can find a legal way to impose tariffs on the UK at a higher or at a higher rate like 15. But flood the zone, and it gets us guessing. What's he doing? Where's he going? Who do we talk to? All these kinds of things. The best strategy, I think, is the one that's you take your time. You don't respond to each and every tweet or Truth Social that the president puts out. And you create your allies in Washington. Make sure that the channels of communication are open and build that resiliency that I think the Prime Minister's been talking about. Developing foreign markets for our goods. The defense announcement that came out last week, I thought was an interesting one. I thought the reaction was interesting. The Americans are saying, you know, America first, we don't need your cars, but you better buy our aerospace and our defense procurement. A little bit of hypocrisy there, but that's never stopped them in the past, so why should it in the future? But just in terms of a calm approach going forward, I think has served well, and I think will continue to serve well over the coming vital months.
And Kate, just the one last bit of the wire copy here. I've been waiting to see who it is that's going to be the first to sue for their refund. FedEx wins that race. They're suing the United States to get a full refund on emergency tariffs after the Supreme Court ruling that found President Trump had no authority to impose them, their lawsuit says. So the race is on, and there are Canadian firms that work on both sides of the border that have been paying those that will be trying to get into line to get their money back too.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point, Peter. There is so much instability and uncertainty that's been created both by the tariffs and now this ruling, and it's really businesses that are feeling the impact of that uncertainty and creating so many challenges for companies operating particularly on both sides of the border. That's why I think it's really important for Canada to, you know, keep its head around, this ruling, which really doesn't impact us, and consider more how to find progress on those sectoral tariffs, because those have been relentless and unchanged since Trump has taken office.
Peter, I got to tell you, I'm shocked, I tell you, that it's a company that was paying the tariffs, and
an
not
American company at
yes,
that.
and not foreign countries, because we were assured that the foreign countries. We were also and yet the New York Fed. I think this was the beginning of the setbacks for Trump. The New York Fed came out with a report last week that said 90% of the cost of these tariffs were being borne by American consumers and companies, that it was having a weakening effect rather than a strengthening effect on the dollar, and that it was not bringing manufacturing back to the United States. I know that facts are often out of fashion in Washington these days, but they are stubborn and immutable, and those are facts.
Those were facts, and I feel like that led to this moment that freed up. You had Congress, you had the New York Fed, now you got the Supreme Court. The shackles that we saw in January, February, March, and April are off, and it's a different ballgame now.